Hey, Chris, how are you?
I'm good. Good morning, Jonathan. Great to see you.
So we're mainly talking about Monarch King. I was gonna say King of the Monsters, but that's Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Well,
This is
he is. He
Monarch.
is the king. He is the king of the monsters. So,
This is Monarch Legacy of Monsters. And I got about halfway through the show when I said I gotta have
and you
you on
were
the
out.
show to
You're
talk
like, I
about it.
can't watch this crap anymore. It's like,
Come on now, don't do that. We've known each other long enough, and everything you've done since I've known you, I've been a fan of. And then I go back and I'm like, oh, I also liked that. But we met when you were doing we met
was it Outcast?
Outcast. It was
Yeah.
Outcast, and that was the first adaptation you did, the Robert Kirkman comic, which I love the comic. I love Paul Azteca's artwork. I love the show. I think you and Patrick Fugit made an incredible show.
Oh, thank you. That
And then
was
of course
that was. I love working with Robert and Paul. And I can't remember her. Liz, I think, was her name, who did the colors. Did an amazing team. And Robert is just the nicest guy, the most talented, funny, creative, sweetest guy you'd ever want to work with. He was unbelievably generous to me, and he made it very clear early on that sort of he had creative ownership over the comics, but that I had freedom to make the show what it needed to be. That we didn't have to have this absolute fidelity to what he had written. He just wanted to tell the best story, and he understood that doing a TV show, an episodic TV show, was different than writing a comic. It wasn't the same thing. It required a different, approach. And he was incredibly kind and generous to me. And I would love to do something with him again. We just haven't had the opportunity.
There's an episode you guys added that isn't a narrative in the comic book, but you added the episode about the ex coming back, and there was a history of abuse.
Oh, right. Yeah, that was the sister's character, who's, God, it's been so long now I can't remember.
I know, but I just remember watching that episode and just loving that deviation from
Ren Schmidt. I just saw Ren. I had run into Ren, who is now on and has been for several seasons on For All Mankind. And I saw her and her husband not that long ago. I ran into her at an Apple event, and we went and had breakfast. And she's so great. She was so great in that part.
Well, it was all written, and then obviously Severance. Which
Severance was, again, I feel like I keep giving all the credit to other people, but Severance was all Dan Erickson. I mean, Dan Erickson wrote that pilot on spec. It was one of the most brilliant special things that I had ever read. And Dan is just a delight and just the kindest, sweetest guy who deserves all the recognition and acclaim that he's gotten. And, I came in, he had never sold anything before. He had never run a show. And so I kind of came in as the crusty old veteran to kind of help him assemble a room, hire writers, get a team together, kind of navigate the process of dealing with the studio and a network. And I really saw my role as to just kind of defend and support Dan's vision on that show, because it was his voice is so unique. And obviously Ben Stiller did an amazing job. He's an incredible director. So much of the casting and the look of that show was Ben, but the sort of creative DNA of that show was all Dan. And I was really happy to be able to support that project. It's really special. It's one of the most unique, special things I've ever been associated with.
Loved it. And now we've got Monarch and Geekscape. I just want to tell you right now, if you're listening to this, or maybe we'll put this out on video, but if you're watching this or listening to this, we're going to start spoiling it pretty good, because I really want to talk about the full season.
We can spoil it. It's all aired now, right?
It's all aired. It's on Apple Plus.
What's the statute of limitations on spoilers?
I think I just scratched it with that warning and said, if you haven't watched all 10 episodes of Monarch Legacy of Monsters, we're going to really get into it. And I think I'll just start, Chris, with your involvement in it. Were you already circling it or pitching on it, or who came to who first? And obviously Severance was an Apple Plus
right. I think the fact that I had an associate, I wasn't circling it. It wasn't something I was aware of. I mean, obviously, let me back up. I was obviously aware of Godzilla. I loved the Toho franchise from when I was a kid, watching those movies on my on the floor of my parents' living room on the Saturday afternoon chiller theater or whatever, and had seen, all the classic Toho movies and was familiar with the current Legendary franchise, had seen those as well, but was not really aware that it was in active development as a TV series. And there was an old friend and colleague of mine who I had worked with years ago at ABC when I was working on shows like Ugly Betty, who was then an exec at Legendary. And I remember it vividly because it was the last in-person meeting, was March of 2020. It was the last in-person meeting I had before everything shut down for COVID. And Nick Pepper is his name, who's a great guy. And he sat down with me and we were talking about things that we could do together. And he said, do you know Godzilla? And I was like, well, of course I know Godzilla. And he said, we've been developing it, Legendary, does the movies, has its own kind of canonical universe, the Legendary feature films that are separate from the Toho mythology. And he said, it's set up at Apple. We have been trying to develop it as a series for a while. They'd been working with Matt Fraction, but for whatever reason had just not been able to get it just across the finish line at Apple. Apple just wasn't seeing it yet, wasn't seeing it as an Apple show. So
Matt was on it first.
Matt was on first. Matt came in early. Matt had been there for a while, had done a few different iterations of it, and working with another producing team, these producers at a company called Safe House, and then with the in-house team at Legendary, and had done great work, and had really, and Matt is a passionate fan of Godzilla. I mean, Matt Fraction, who is, again, I feel like I just keep heaping praise on other people, who's just a delight and one of the best guys in the world to work with. It has the kanji symbols for Godzilla tattooed across his knuckles. So, I mean, that's the degree of the passion, the depth of history and passion that Matt brings to it. But for whatever reason, Apple wasn't seeing it as a show yet. They just were not seeing, what was this, what could we bring to this big kind of sci-fi monster driven franchise that felt like an Apple show. And I started working with Matt and with Legendary, and we came up with this way into it that was this young woman, Kate, who discovers that her father is keeping the secret and has a whole other family. And, once we kind of changed our tack and came to Apple and said, it's not a show about monsters, it's a show about people who happen to live in a world where monsters exist, they started to see it as a show for their brand. And that was kind of what cracked it open, was the Kate and Kentaro searching for their dad of it all.
And I feel like the original Godzilla that Max Borenstein had been working on had that element, with the humans being the focus.
2014,
the 2014 version,
and yes,
and then but in 2020, when y'all are having this conversation, there's King of the Monsters, and King of the Monsters really is. It's the monsters, and I love that movie because it is so many of the greatest playing the greatest hits from the Godzilla universe. And of course, you want to see Kong versus Godzilla, which was the movie that came out during the it got hit by the pandemic, but it was still really enjoyable. And there's this new one, the Kingdom one, coming out here in March.
Godzilla X.
But it feels like
also, it's funny, it's what a small town it is in Hollywood. Godzilla X Kong and Godzilla versus Kong, both directed by Adam Wingard, who directed the Outcast pilot.
I remember that. I remember when he was announced for the Outcast pilot. I love that Outcast pilot, and I think that his Godzilla Kong movies are so much fun, and you can tell that everyone's playing with toys that they love.
Right.
When you come in,
we talk about, it's funny you should say that, refer to them as toys, because it's really, Fraction and I talk about this a lot, is that we are so honored and lucky to come play, like Legendary and Toho invited us into their sandbox and basically said, here, you can play with our toys, don't break them, but have fun with them, and that
was there a lot of oversight on their end?
There was weirdly more oversight, I think, from Legendary, not in an intrusive way.
No, but it has to dovetail with what they're doing.
It has to dovetail with the feature films. Exactly. And so it was much more like a lot more kind of eyes on us to making sure that we fit neatly into that space. And our timeline for the show is between 2014 Godzilla and King of the Monsters, which there's like a 5-year gap between the movies. So it's a pretty good span of time where we can create our own world where you don't know what's going on in the feature timeline. So we had to take some care with them. Toho was great. Toho was just so excited that we were even doing the show. I mean, they have been incredibly supportive. They loved the show. They loved the scripts. When we shot in Tokyo for the first season, they invited us to the studio, which was, I mean, it was like a pilgrimage. We were going to where these original movies had been made. They have a statue of Godzilla at the entrance to Toho Studios in Tokyo, and they're the best. Just incredibly lovely, supportive, smart, fun people to work with, and they're just excited we're doing the show.
The opening of the show, when you have, this is where I was like, oh, this is going to be a lot of fun, because you have the John Goodman version.
Oh, right, the Skull Island.
William Randa, and he's back on Skull Island, and that's your jumping off point, is that you're back with William Randa or Bill Randa that you met in Skull Island. Right. And that's where I felt like you guys were going to cast the entire net and really celebrate the entire legendary monster verse,
right?
And at least hopefully, so just kind of fit it in here to kind of like fill in the cracks of the stuff that we want to see. And I loved how much more William Randa we got. And then of course, if you read Max Borenstein's graphic novel that came out as a prequel to the 2014 Godzilla, you picked up like the character that he introduced in it, and he's a major character here in Shaw.
Oh, Shaw, right. Yeah, no, I did. It was funny. Well, there's a lot there to unpack. I mean, you talked initially about the Godzilla King of the Monsters, which really is this kind of fun grab bag of all the classic monsters. And we knew we kind of couldn't do that because it's not a feature film. We're not telling a complete story in 2 hours. You have to be able to have a story that can continue through 10 episodes. And if we're lucky, a second season, third, fourth, fifth season, who knows? Thank you. So we couldn't just pack all the classic characters into the first episode. We had to sort of, and plus as purely as a practical matter, we didn't have the budget for it. And, we had to tell a human-centric story because those big digital monsters are expensive, and if you've seen the first season of the show, Godzilla appears in less than 4 minutes of actual screen time.
That being said,
10 episodes, but you feel his presence over the whole.
He's huge.
Yeah,
you have the Golden Gate sequence from the first film,
right?
And how much of that was footage from that first film? None of it. So you had to remake those giant set pieces.
Well, and that I have to give Max Chapman credit, the director credit for, because when we wrote it, initially the thinking was, well, we'll save money. We'll set it inside the school bus, because you see the buses on the bridge in the movie. And we thought, well, we put this character in that bus, and then we can take footage from Gareth Edwards' film, and we can put it through the windows, and we can save money that way. And then when Matt Chapman came in, he looked at it and he said, to give you the sequence you want, to give you the impact you want of this character's loss and the trauma this character experiences, we need to stage our own scene. And so that's what he did, and it's spectacular. They shot it in Vancouver in a parking lot with that bus on a big like air bladder, so it bounced up around, and then blue screens all around to put the bridge and everything in the background, and the big rain birds pouring rain up above, and filled with extras and cars, and it was fantastic. That was all Matt. And
was there pushback from Legendary?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there was not. There was no creative pushback. There was. I think there were always eyes on the money we're spending, and that's partly my job too. I'm, as the executive producer of the show, part of my responsibility is to deliver something within the financial parameters they've given us, and they were generous. It was a generous. I don't want to talk about numbers.
Sure.
But it's far and away the biggest, most expensive thing I've ever been associated with. They gave us a very generous amount of money to accomplish this with, but you find you burn through it very quickly when you start putting Godzilla on the screen. So
can we get some more people talking? Maybe no, but you guys did a great job.
But it makes it a TV show, because a TV show is to, the best TV I think is people talking. I mean, and it's the difference between doing it as a series and doing, say, one of Adam's movies, which is on an IMAX, designed to be seen on with an audience and on an IMAX movie screen.
That being said, Geekscape, there's a kaiju pretty much in every episode, and there are new kaijus in the universe, and I loved the creativity with that stuff.
Well, we got it because we knew it was the Godzilla show. It's like we couldn't just make it, we couldn't do Mad Men,
Mm-hmm.
It was like it had to be, people come, if you call it Monarch Legacy of Monsters, and people refer to it as the Godzilla show, Apple is doing the Godzilla show, fans of the franchise, fans of the movie are going to come and want to see Godzilla. And they, it was a little bit of a balancing act to tell this character-driven story about a family, about these people, about a brother and a sister on a journey searching for their father. That was the kind of quest. We talked a lot about the hero's journey. This was their quest, to find their dad and solve the mystery of Monarch, but still give the audience what they expect, which is the MonsterVerse. And so I think we did a good job. We didn't want it to be we didn't want it to be a Monster of the Week procedural, but we knew there had to be some, either a kaiju presence or a titan or a monster presence, either in the present day story or the flashback story, in pretty much every episode. I think there's only one episode that there's not a monster in. It might be episode 7, which is the May flashback story. I don't think has a monster in it, but we tried to keep it alive. And part of the mandate too was to embrace the classic canon of monsters. Obviously, Godzilla is the premier headliner of season 1, but also to expand the pantheon. I mean, I think Apple very much wanted to see some creatures that were new to their universe, not just mining the back catalog of Toho monsters.
The ice mole monster is still my favorite.
It was cool. It turned out great, didn't it? That was
awesome.
Yeah, that was something that I can't remember. It might have been Matt Fraction. Someone in the room had come up with the idea of those, the sort of the star-faced voles or moles that have the face that has the little tentacles on it as a foundation for it. And then Sean Conrad, who's our visual effects supervisor in the team, the concept artist, and everybody kind of evolved it into this kind of weird sort of pangolin armadillo looking thing, with that lives under the ice. And it was cool. It really turned out great.
What I liked about it the most, and why I think it's great to have in an early episode, is it sets up what becomes important later with the ants. And you start to justify some of the sci-fi that makes the characters make sense. And we can talk about Kurt and Wyatt Russell playing the same character and the time jumps, because I want to find out like how you outlined the differences between the 1950 story you're telling and the 2014-15 story that you're telling, and you have to keep both of those parallel. I think only one episode again doesn't throw back to the 50s. And then was it similar to the same way you're outlining and keeping parallel stories with Severance, where things are happening at the same time in Severance for the most part, but the characters are living in two different worlds of the same character? Like, how are you outlining that stuff, and how are you planting things like seeds, etc.?
It's funny, I hadn't really thought about it much, maybe subconsciously, but until you just mentioned it. But it is very much like the innie-outie world of Severance. And I mean, the main thing is you just do it in the room. Matt and I and the other writing EP on the show, Andy Colville, and the staff. We have a great staff of writers. You put things up on the board and you put colored cards up, and these are the present day cards. And we would always refer to Shaw, older character is Shaw and younger character is Lee. So there would be Shaw and Lee, because he was Lee in the past and Shaw in the present, and they would have different colored cards, and we would put them up, and you would sort of be able to, and you would move things around, and you would just be able to kind of look at the boards and see, this story is too weighted towards the present. There aren't enough flashback cards, but tracking the storylines, it wasn't always easy. I mean, there were times I joke where we would get excited about a pitch, and our writer's assistant would kind of go, guys, that character hasn't been born yet. And we'd be like, oh, shit. Like, that's right. Because we'd get so wrapped up in telling the story that we weren't keeping track of what year it was, but it all sorted out. I'm sure if you watch the show closely, I'm sure there are people on Reddit who are. There's probably stuff we screwed up and things that don't line up quite right and stuff that always slips through the cracks. But when we tried to be really diligent about it's all planning. It's all just the more time you have to build the architecture, to blueprint it out, and pressure test it, then it works on the screen. And we would try in terms of making the stories line up. Sometimes they were linked by a plot element, but what we tried to do most often was link them sort of emotionally, like what is going on in the past with these characters that is reinforcing how they feel in the present. I think episode 6 is a good example. Episode 8 is a good example of what Shaw was going through in the past that informed the decisions that he made in the present. Those were the kind of linkages that we made or tried to make when they worked.
Well, we've met that world before in Kong versus Godzilla. The underneath, was there when you start to introduce the element that time works drastically different in between the worlds, and we'll absolutely talk about the Kiko Shaw reunion scene. But was there anything that on the Legendary side caused some conflict there, where it's like where Legendary's like, well, we have both worlds in our movies too, and that might change the plots in our because they have the same worlds. Do they want to play by the same rule of time discrepancy?
I think that was the biggest minefield that we stumbled into in breaking the first season. Was that it evolved a lot. It changed over the course of the season. It was not supposed to originally end the way it ended. It was like one of the I'll give you a little peek behind the curtain. I mean, the initial idea was that they were going to travel to Hollow Earth and they were going to find Hiroshi there, the father, that was where he disappeared to. And we got about midway through the season and it started feeling like the search for Dad was getting very frustrating, like that they were just missing him. How many more times could they just miss him? And we got to episode 6, and I believe it was Andy Colville in the room who pitched, well, why don't they just find him? What if they just find him? Maybe that's the surprise we need. That's the twist we need, is that they come up over that sand dune in North Africa.
Not technically a sand dune.
Well, I'm sorry?
Not technically a sand dune.
Yeah, not technically a sand dune. No. Well, there weren't a lot of sand dunes in British Columbia where we shot.
Right.
So that whatever that ridge, that kind of mountain ridge or whatever they come up.
It was a sleeping Godzilla, is what I'm saying.
Oh yeah. Yes,
it's not a sand dune at all. It's he's taking a cat
that was
nap.
a very early. I think that was a very early pitch by Joby Harold, who was one of our non-writing producers, who kind of said, wouldn't it be cool if we had a scene that played out on Godzilla's body? Yeah. And that ultimately evolved into that sequence where he was kind of sleeping in the desert in North Africa and the dunes. It's one of my favorite episodes. That's episode 6. It's one of my favorite episodes of the season, and the Sean and the VFX team just knocked it out of the park. I mean, it's that big reveal where he rises up and he knocks the helicopter out of the sky, and there's a shot, and I remember this is a great budget conversation because there was a shot where Godzilla kind of his tail sweeps around over the guys' heads and then hits this kind of cliff face behind them, and that shot was on the chopping block. It was a really expensive shot and we were over budget, and I remember us having a conversation when we were spotting VFX saying, it's like it puts our characters in the frame with him. It gives a sense of scale. It's one of the only shots where they're actually tied into frame with him.
You need that for Jeopardy for sure.
And it was a really expensive shot, but I felt it was really important, and so we put it in, and it's great. It's it's really spectacular. But yes, it was It was not. You're right. It was not a sand dune. It was Godzilla. But it was like so. Then the whole back half of the season changed. It wasn't, it was like, and I can't remember at what point in the development. I think we knew very early on that we didn't want Keiko to be dead. That when she drops down that hole, that rift, that chasm at the plutonium plant in the beginning, that we knew we would see her again. We wanted to see her again. I don't think we had quite figured out yet how that was going to play out, and just over the course of breaking the season, and a lot of people pitching ideas, that the idea of her being sort of preserved in time and not having age it's not the most, it's a genre trope. It's not like the most original idea in the world, but we knew we wanted that actor back, Mari Yamamoto, because she's amazing. And as you say, it teed up that fantastic scene with her and Kurt at the end when they see each other again for the first time. But to talk about the legendary of it all, we had originally pitched it as Hollow Earth because we knew that was kind of a key piece of the feature mythology. And then the feature team started getting a little nervous about it because their movie was coming out, and Hollow Earth was a huge component of that. And I think they were concerned that the stories weren't going to line up, and they didn't want us stepping on each other's toes. So it was a little bit of a little dance. We came up with this idea of Axis Mundi, which is sort of a subterranean realm, an alternate realm where time moves differently. That's sort of Hollow Earth adjacent, if you will.
But it's not Hollow Earth. So the characters of the film can still age concurrently with anybody on Earth.
Exactly. We had to kind of create our own little kind of pocket of time and space within the larger mythology, which it was a little bit of a last minute shuffle to figure out. But I think at the end of the day, it really worked well for story.
Well, Chris, I texted you immediately, and then shortly after I texted you, it was on like TV Line or something, the recognition for that scene with the reunion scene between Shaw and Kiko. And for what you said earlier about this, yes, it's a Godzilla show, but it's about the humans. That must have been a great reward to have the recognition for that scene specifically being two human scenes. And it was awesome. Can you just talk about where that idea came from, and how do you, I don't know, you didn't have a whole lot of, you still got to fit this within an action show. So the economy of that scene, how do you keep the dialogue down? Does that make sense? Like the blocking obviously is important of it.
Sometimes you just can't worry about being economical. Sometimes you just have to let the scene be what it is. And then you find in the editing room, you get in the editing room and you can kind of play with it and craft it and shape it. And if it feels like it's dragging, you could tighten it up, or you lose a line here or there. But, I think that was a scene that you just knew was playing. And it really is, a testament to those two actors. There was a scene that was on the page. But Kurt was very passionate about that scene. He had a very specific idea of how he wanted to play that scene.
The blocking of hiding was his idea?
That was his idea. He really wanted to do it. It wasn't original. It's been a while. I don't really remember. But I don't think it was not originally written that way. And it was his idea that he couldn't just appear to her, that he had to somehow kind of prepare her for what she was about to see.
That he had aged and she had not. Yeah.
That he had aged and she had not, and that he needed to sort of speak to her before she saw him. And it was brilliant. It was like, I have to give all credit really to Kurt for that. And but
I'm going to ensure that you keep some credit by the end of this conversation.
No, that was really he really asserted some ownership over that, which it is a collaboration. We have a creative team. We have a team of artists. Between the production people and the writing staff and the actors, the cast. And with that cast, that entire cast, not just Kurt and Wyatt, but all of them, that cast is a gift for a writer. Kiersey and Anna and Ren, Takahiro, who plays Hiroshi, is just one of the finest actors I've ever worked with in my career. And even in some of the smaller roles, Joe Tippett, who plays the character of Tim, is just that guy's the best. He's gold. You can give him anything and he will make something great out of it. So
it's a bit of the voice of the audience. Like, what are you guys doing here? What is happening?
Exactly. And his partner, Elisa, who plays the character of Duval, those two just worked great together. Everything just clicked. All those pieces. And the actresses who played the moms, everybody. I was incredibly we were just blessed to have those actors. But that scene between Mari and Kurt was so much a product of, yes, there were words on the page, we wrote a scene, but what that scene became really was ultimately a function of those two actors kind of making that moment happen. And her reaction is so heartbreaking, as she puts together, she does the math in her head before Shaw even reveals himself, and her realizing what this means for her husband and her son that she left behind is heartbreaking. The writers were on strike during a lot of the post-production. And so I wasn't able to go do a lot of the sound mixes, but the strike ended, and episode 110 was the only one I was able to actually go to the mix stage and be there when they mixed it, and which is great fun. There's not really a lot for you to do at that point. Everything's already been done, but to go and sit on the mix stage and watch it with the post team and the mixers on the big screen booming through those big speakers, and I was glad. I was joking. They dimmed the lights, and I was glad because I was crying like a baby at the end of that.
It must have felt great to have that scene.
It's very satisfying.
That's the episode. I mean, the episode you wrote. Again, I love the Severance episode you wrote as well as a highlight for me.
Well, again,
I'm not just saying that because you're my guest. Like, those are solid episodes.
Well, thanks. I mean, look, I'm a decent writer. I think when
there it is. We're gonna get you to pat yourself on the back.
I mean, I think I've been doing it long enough. I wouldn't have survived in the business as long as I have. My hair wouldn't be this white if I wasn't able to put it on the page when it mattered. But it's not, for me anyway, it's not about the lone artist sitting in his writer's shack, tortured. It's like at the end of the day, your mission is not to like put words on a page. Your mission is to make a movie or a TV show, and the only thing the audience has, we're not mailing our scripts out to the audience to sit in their living rooms and read. The only thing they have is what they see on their TV screens or their iPhones or their iPads or however they're watching it. So it is a truly collaborative effort between everybody. And Severance, it's like, that episode that has my name on it, I'm very proud of, and we won some awards for the show, which I'm really grateful for. But so much of that was Dan's genius and Ben's vision and those actors, and it doesn't work unless all the members of the team are working together.
Does that create a safe space environment for pitching, where in the room where it's like, hey, you know what, like I got the something's coming to me, I'm going to throw it out there, somebody run with it. I mean, it feels like if you build the room right, we can talk about that as showrunner, but like if you build the room right, people should feel that fearless that, yes, my name's going to go on the episode, but I know that some of these talented people in the room are going to help catch me and maybe finish the sentence that's forming in my head.
Well, you hit it. I mean, it's 100%. To me, building the room is the single most important thing in the job of being a showrunner. I mean, it's the team that you get together, everybody has to be pulling in the same direction, and it has to be a safe space. You have to be willing and feel safe to pitch your craziest, dumbest ideas and throw shit out there and not be worried that people will make fun of you. And I've always encouraged that, it's like, and some of the worst, dumbest ideas that get pitched in the room come from me. So it's like, I'm, if it, and everybody laughs and goes, yeah, that's a dumb idea, but what if, sure. Then it generates a conversation and moves things forward. And building the team, I stole after the first season of Severance. I just pulled as many of those writers over to Monarch as I could. Andy Colville, Amanda Overton, Carrie Drake, our writer's assistant, Tanner Hansinger. I just plundered that room, and dragged them over to Monarch, and there is a trust, and I'm always excited to meet new people, and there were a couple of writers, Mariko Tamaki and Al Letson, and people who had come into the room who I hadn't worked with before that were just a joy and a revelation. But like Andy Colville, I've worked on 3 shows with. Amanda Overton, I've worked on 3 shows with. Carrie Drake, I've worked with on 2 shows. It's like, there's a trust, and a familiarity, and what they're going to bring to the table, and it's like you say, creating a safe space. If it's a bunch of colleagues and friends who have that collective experience, you're safe. You can come in and pitch your craziest, dumbest stuff, and some good ultimately, hopefully, will come out of it.
I got just a little bit more, but
sure.
Did they give you? I mean, you guys had the starting point, the bridge on the Golden Gate Bridge in Godzilla's.
Well, the starting point technically was Skull Island, and
Skull Island. Yes,
I mentioned that before. It was like I can't remember.
Did you guys pitch that, or was that something that Legendary was like? This is your parameters. You guys can exist within these goalposts.
I don't want to take credit that isn't due, but I think that was my pitch. I think it was something I came up with in the pilot script. But if because
Monarch's a huge part of that movie, and so it makes a lot of sense that you start quote unquote at the beginning, and then you move the beginning even further.
That came from Matt. The Bill Randa, that if it's about Monarch, if it's about the history of Monarch, to go back to World War II and post World War II and start with Billy Randa, young Billy Randa, that was Matt's idea, and I liked this idea of linking it to the feature franchise. Obviously, we wanted a big cold open. We wanted to start with a big monster fight just to let the audience know, okay, this is the Godzilla show you're going to get. You start on Skull Island, and then there's the giant spider fighting the giant crab, and it's like, okay, strap in. This is what you're going to get. And linking it to the feature franchise. And we loved, of the feature films, Matt and I are big fans of Kong Skull Island. And we felt tonally that was the kind of show we wanted to do, a big adventure show. And in some of the other shows like King of the Monsters and in the 2014 Godzilla, we liked the fact that they were more character focused, kind of that they focused on these families, but they were also very dark.
They're not an ensemble in the way that Skull Island is an ensemble.
They also were very sort of, as we would joke, you end up with a lot of, dead kids and dead parents in those movies. And, and we wanted something that was a little more up, that was a little more fun. That was
kill a bunch of kids on a school bus immediately? Wait a minute, you're betraying yourself.
They weren't characters you knew. So, but we wanted Kate's trauma. We wanted Kate. Kate needed to be traumatized.
Sure.
That was really key. And so that was her. And you only see Godzilla in the pilot episode through her post-traumatic flashback. But we wanted, and partly what Apple wanted was a big globe-trotting, fun adventure show. Where they go, and we felt tonally, in terms of kind of being, a big action-packed kind of monster adventure, that Skull Island was a better template. That was more of a template that we wanted to follow than, say, Godzilla King of the Monsters was.
Was there a landing zone that they gave you for the final episode? Because the final episode, the big spoiler is that we get Kong in the last
I think there was, because Kong has become such a popular character in the features, and really kind of drives and owns the feature franchise now. I think there was, they never dictated anything to us. They never said you have to do this or make sure you put Kong in the show. But I think there was a sense that as the show evolved, that Kong could become a character in it. There was excitement about that. So, and we love Kong too. So we were happy to do it. But that opening prologue in the pilot with John Goodman, I wrote it never expecting that we would get John Goodman. I thought this is for the page. We'll get everybody excited about it, and then ultimately it'll be something else. We'll do something else because John Goodman won't be available, or he won't be interested, or we won't be able to afford him. And it turned out all those things were wrong. He was delightful and happy to do it, and a trooper, and flew to Hawaii.
That helps. Does help.
And shot for 2 days. And the one thing he said when they approached him, when casting approached him about doing this, was he was actually worried that we weren't going to be happy because he's physically, changed quite a bit since that movie was made. As he pointed out, he'd gotten much healthier. He had, he had lost a lot of weight and was in, a much healthier place than he was when that movie was made. And he was concerned that we were not going to be satisfied with his performance or how we looked. And, but once we got him out there, and clearly he's older, that movie was made a few years ago, but once you got him in the makeup and the beard and the hat and the costume and everything, it was great. It was like, oh my God, there's Bill Randa.
Again, it goes into the question I had for the Golden Gate sequence where it's like, was that footage from the, what was that sequence? I thought it was awesome.
I could be wrong. I don't think, and someone will correct me when they hear this, I don't think we used any footage from the movie. There might have been a shot or two through the bus windows. I could be wrong about that, but the whole sequence of, the bus falling and Kate tumbling out and looking up and seeing Godzilla and Godzilla tearing through the suspension cables, and that was all Matt Shackman and the visual effects team.
It had to be a very specific POV or it wouldn't have worked. Right?
Well, POV is interesting. It was one of the things we talked about in the show, was that we wanted, because we were telling a character-driven story, we wanted the POV to be ground level. We wanted the POV to be as these characters experience their world. Matt Fraction would say, we're not doing a 9/11 show, we're doing a 9/12 show. It's sort of the day after. It's like, how do you pick yourself up? And everything had to be from that ground level looking up. I think there's only one shot in the season that is one of those kind of God's eye hero shots, and it's in 6 when Godzilla rises up out of the desert and then the camera kind of sweeps around him, and you from like a helicopter POV, and you sort of see him rise up in his full majesty. And I think, and again, I could be wrong, I think that's the only shot that's not done from a human on the ground perspective looking up at the monsters.
I'm trying to think if there's one at the Bikini Atoll.
There might be one at Bikini Atoll where the camera swoops back up along his spine.
But for the most part, y'all shot Godzilla like Jaws on that one, and you were kind of keeping things at water from a distance, or human.
Like you're looking through binoculars and you're looking through lenses, and it's the people on the beach, and what are they seeing? And you're right, there is a shot where it cuts out to where Godzilla is out with the H-bomb. But
that's it.
What we tried to do is really tell it from the point of view of these characters.
Okay. Eric in our Facebook Forever or Geekscape Forever group says, how much did Kurt and Wyatt develop the character together? Because they're never in any scenes together, obviously, but was it planned beforehand or did it just fall into place? You've talked about how Kurt developed some of the blocking and some of the scenes and beats, but did they ever throw football to each other and say, well, if you set that up, I can pay it off in the modern day storyline?
Yeah, they absolutely did, and I think they were, and if you have a chance to talk with them, they could speak to it more directly. But I think they were very mindful of and excited about this idea that they were playing the same character, that it wasn't a father and a son, that it wasn't, that it was that the character that they were creating was the same character, and the history and the mannerisms and all that stuff needed, obviously. He's a more mature character later who's been through a lot and learned a lot and views life differently. But they very much, I remember Matt Fraction telling me sometimes that like Kurt would show up when Wyatt was shooting, and he would look at the monitors and they would watch each other's performance. And there are times when they do it, honestly, that I don't think it's planned. I think there's stuff that's just genetic. I think there are times when Wyatt will do a little look or a head turn or something, and you just go, "Oh, that's Kurt." Like
your dad does that.
Yeah, I don't think, and I could be wrong. I don't think they planned it that way. I think that's just the fact that they are father and son. But they did, yeah. To my understanding, was they absolutely coordinated that crafting and creating that character together.
And I never read the Godzilla Awakening story that Max did. Honestly, I know Max.
I have it around here somewhere.
But I've never. Max, apologies. The last time I saw Max was at an event for Winning Time over at the Academy, and I love you, Max. But I haven't read his Godzilla Awakening. I'm guessing that was given to Matt Fraction to be like, here's some of the tools in our toy. Here's some of the toys we have, and he took that character that originated in the graphic novel and put it into.
Well, I did that actually.
Did that. Okay, so even though Matt was on first and dealing with the legendary people,
the Shaw character came later. Was not originally conceived, as I recall. And apologies, Matt Fraction, if I'm remembering this wrong. But I don't think in Matt's original pitch, I don't think the Shaw character was a character. We had been given the whole. And apologies to Max Bornstein, that we had been given the whole canon, but we had also been told that the comic storylines we did not have to adhere to, that they were, that yes, they were available to us. We could use them if they worked for us. They were part of the larger mythology, but they were not necessarily considered strict canon for the features. And so the thing that we had to adhere to was the feature canon. And if there was stuff in the comic series that we could use, great, but we weren't beholden to it. But then I went back and read them all, and we knew we wanted this military character. We had made up this, this guy who existed in both timelines. And this was before Kurt and Wyatt were cast. He was just this character in the show, Lee Shaw, And as I was reading through all of the comics, there was this character who was an army person that Serizawa, I believe, encounters in the past, and I think he's just referred to as Shaw. I don't know if he even has a first name.
Sure.
And I thought, oh, let's make him that guy. He's in the mythology. He exists in the world. I don't believe he's a big character I think he just kind of comes and goes as a military guy on one of Serizawa's missions. But I was like, okay, well, since we're living in this larger world, why not make this a character who's already there, who's already a part of it, and so appreciation to Max for giving us that guy.
And it's great because it tightens the net. It really, this whole tapestry that you guys are playing with, it really fills in a lot of blanks. It's fun. I think the audience appreciates it. And so we've talked about Monarch. I have to ask you what your favorite kaiju is from your childhood and maybe from the show.
Well, look, it's Godzilla. It sounds like a cheat. It sounds like a cheat. Like I'm
sure.
No, but it's Godzilla. Godzilla is the one that I grew up with. Again, I'm old enough to have watched these old movies on my parents' black and white television. When I was a kid, and they would run, whatever the independent TV station was, I assume would buy them in like packages, and so
it was a marathon,
so they would just run them on the $1 Million Movie or whatever, and it was this giant lizard, which was clearly a guy in a rubber suit stomping around, kicking over buildings and stuff like that. And that, when you're 5 or 6 or 8 years old, is what just sucked you into that. It seemed so real, and so he still, to me, is the king of the monsters, and they're all fun. I've soft spot for Hedera, the smog monsters, like one of my favorites.
But we're not going to see Godzuki anytime.
I don't think so. I love Rodan. I'm a sucker for a fire breathing dragonfly.
Love Rodan. In the Rodan film, when they're opening with them, the Rodan script and the Rodan film is such an incredibly sound movie.
One of my favorite moments in and I keep pitching this, and we have not yet figured out a way to put it in the show, is there's a great mislead in the Rodan movie where these guys, if I'm remembering it correctly, these guys are going down into this mine, and there's a monster mine that's killing them. And what they initially discover are these big kind of like gross kind of grubs the size of school buses or something. And you think that's the monster. And then what you realize later is, no, those are the little mealworms that Rodan eats. And it's like the monster itself is like 100 times bigger.
And you guys have mealworms kind of creatures in this, they pull Kiko into the
the little the endoswarm, I think they call them.
Right. But they were flying almost, and they were a little more arachnid.
Insectoid kind of little things, but they were it's funny because we just, in the script, they would just be, I can't remember what they called them. They had a very generic, the creatures or the insects or the insectoids or whatever we call them. And then, but legendary mythology is very, you have to make up names for everything. They all have to have names.
I mean, would you love it if they suddenly were like, hey, that shrew creature you guys had in the ice thing, can we pull that into one of the films? And
oh my god, of course, it would be an
how
honor.
awesome would that be? So we're talking kaiju to wrap up. Chris, we got to talk about the kaiju in the room, and that would be Godzilla -1.
Well, look, I mean,
Wow.
here's the thing is Godzilla's having a moment, you know, and we kind of look at it as anything that's good for Godzilla is good for all of it. The rising tide raises all the Godzilla boats. So
Yes.
it's like we don't
even if they're exploding ordnance up the coast.
I mean, we're humbled.
Tokyo.
You look at that movie and you're kind of humbled. You know, you're like, oh my God, here's something that's a dramatic.
I don't think it's in competition. It's awesome though.
Yes, exactly. We don't feel that we're in competition with that. That anything that we feel fills out it's not a competition, but there is some pressure to feel that we need to raise our level of writing and our level of dramatic storytelling to you know, it's not a competition, but we don't want to do, you know, something that seems silly or dumb or inconsequential, you know.
Were you worried that it got too Scooby Doo with the
our show? No, I wasn't.
The drama you guys had, like you said, 4 minutes of Godzilla in your show for the most part, and lots of human drama. You look at Godzilla -1, and it's lots of human drama and a small amount of Godzilla as well. I would say they're comparable more than they're competitive. I mean, I'm sure some of it would inform the next season of Monarch in a stylistic or a narrative way, but it's two different universes too.
I think it's like I think what it does is, and I'm trying to, I don't want to say anything. I'm trying to be very careful with my words here. I think we're not in competition with them, and we don't feel we should be competition with them. And our colleagues and partners at Toho do not feel we're in competition with them. But we look at something that good, that well executed, and that dramatic and powerful, and you feel, well, it raises the bar for all of us. It's like, okay, now season 2's got to be even greater. Season 2's got to be even more, you know, potent and dramatically relevant, because they are telling such great story in that world, and we have to do that too. Not that we want to make our show into Godzilla -1, because it's not, but it's like okay, the bar gets raised. I mean, you know, and you know, the movies, the feature films, and our TV show and the Toho projects they're all separate and very different, but you know, they all hopefully are exploring different facets, different kind of tonal avenues of what you can do. I mean, I think it's a testament to the power and the longevity and the breadth and the scope of Godzilla. There's so many different ways into that story.
It must be really reaffirming that something comes out that is a majority of a drama, and it still, you know, finds a place, a really passionate place with an audience, in that's what you guys were designing. They did it as well, and the audience has an appetite for that kind of monster storytelling, where it doesn't just have to be WrestleMania with kaiju. Going into season 2,
not that there's anything wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that. We're gonna get it with this next Kong versus Godzilla movie. I mean, like the older Kong has a power glove, from what I can tell. Like, I'm in. You know, I'm there opening day.
Robot arm.
I'm there opening day for older Kong, you know, cranky Kong with a power glove. I'm in. You had me a giant metal glove on a Kong.
Yeah.
I'm in.
But I think it does prove, I mean, the longevity. I mean, this has been a franchise for 70 years. I mean, 1954 was the first Godzilla film, and that it has that longevity and staying power is extraordinary. And it's a heavy responsibility too for us. I mean, that we gotta look, and not everyone's gonna love everything. And I'm incredibly gratified that people have responded well to the show. The reviews have been really positive. People like the show. People watch the show. But there are always people who are going to think we're doing it wrong, or we're doing a disservice, or we're telling the wrong story, or there aren't enough monsters, or whatever. You can't please everyone, but we take it very seriously, and that the people who work on the show, Matt and myself and everybody, love this franchise, love, pardon the pun, the legacy of it, and we're Godzilla super fans, and we want to try and tell the best version of it that we can, and make as many people excited about it as we can.
Well, I loved it, Chris. I loved it, and you got my running commentary through the season, and I apologize for those early.
No, I'm always happy if I get texts that say I love, oh wow, that's great, or holy shit. I'm always happy to get those.
I loved it, and I can't wait for season 2. I am knocking on wood that I haven't heard anything, yes or no, but I'm knocking on wood.
We're, it's not official. Obviously, the show did very well for Apple. They're very happy. Everyone's very excited about it. It's hard to imagine that they're not going to want more. We're the staff we have been working on stories. We have stories to tell, but we're waiting. We're still waiting for an official production green light. But we're all optimistic. We all are optimistic that it's going to come, and we'll be able to keep telling the story.
Loved it, absolutely loved it, and crossing the fingers for the rest of it. And obviously, I'm there opening day for the next Kong Godzilla movie, because these are the movies I wanted when I was 12.
Of course,
I still want as a 45-year-old man.
Yeah, me too.
Chris, I thanks for doing this, and I hope I can see you soon. Comic-Con might get a little sticky for me with the baby. Our baby is due.
Congratulations on that. And it is about prioritizing. I mean, yes. The work is important. I always say, we bring, you pour 100% of yourself into the job. If you take the job, you take it seriously. You bring your A game every single day. But always family first. There's more important things in life than television. And if I look at my daughters every day and am reminded of that. So
incredible. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Jonathan. We'll talk again.
Yes, sir.